I think of the I Ching as a kind of a spiritual power tool. You can ask any question of any sort, and we could explore exactly how it works, but that's always a matter of theory. As a social scientist and originally a research scientist, I'm mostly impressed by the fact that it does work and that it works systematically and consistently. I want to tell you another story or two because I want to give you a couple of case studies, and then we'll talk about the book and some other elements. And if you have questions, be sure to formulate those, and I'd be happy to answer questions, or at least make up something if I don't have an answer. And we want to do cast an actual I Ching sometime in this brief lecture. So we'll want to think of something. I was thinking maybe something about the center might be a good one, or we could ask, I want to ask some kind of a public question rather than somebody's personal question. For this kind of a public setting, it's usually better to do some kind of a generic question. And if you do a public question, then everybody can assess what they think about it. Last time I taught the I Ching for Naropa, they had a public lecture, and they said, we think you'll have 8 or 10 people, and so be prepared. And I was ready for up to a dozen, and I wandered in. It turned out there was free food, and it was noon, and it was a free sampler, and there was all kinds of people who came to get the food and try out all the classes and kind of go to the university for free. And there were 75 people jammed in this room. And I went, oh, great, all right. And the question we decided to ask, since we were going to be teaching an I Ching class, was, what should be included in any good I Ching class? And the I Ching told us what should be incorporated in the class and spelled it all out. It was a very interesting discussion. So we may want to do some kind of a public or generic question. We could even ask a question about Caritas Center, where we are here today. So we'll get to that. In the less dramatic and the less life-saving category, my friend Toby came one morning on a Saturday morning, and he said, well, I'm about ready to go looking for a house, and I'd like to get the I Ching's guidance because it's a huge decision and there's a lot resting on it. And he cast the I Ching, and it said in a nutshell, you're not ready to buy a home. There are major problems inside. You're not seeing things clearly, and any decision you make from this point of view is guaranteed to be flawed. Which was a little discouraging. And he said, he's a very developed being. And he said, well, we don't want to do that, so let's work on what the issues are. And so we started with what's going on inside. And they said, work on what's been spoiled by the mother, and then work on what's been spoiled by the father. So I said, well, let's talk about that. So we talked about mom and dad for a while. And I said, what house did you grow up in? And he talked about that house a little. And I said, what was the story of that house? And he said, now that I remember it, my father always hated that house. He was always complaining about it. And I was a kid. I didn't care. It was just fine. It was home to me. But I remember how much Dad always hated the house. And I said, well, how did that happen? And he thought, and he said, actually my mother picked out the house, and it was part of a battle between them. And all the years we lived there, it was part of a tug-of-war. Oh, great. And I said, well, how about the house that you'd lived in recently when you were married? How about that? And he said, I never liked that house. It really was. And I asked, how did that happen? And he thought for a while. I said, actually, my wife picked that house. And it was just like, oh, I get it. So we really do have a bit of a recurring scene here. And the I Ching is saying, look, that attitude has not left you yet. You're about to go pick out the wrong house again. Because that's what you find normal. That's what makes sense to you. That's what feels like life. So we worked on that, and we asked several questions. And after about 2 hours, we thought, well, we certainly have learned a great deal. And I just had an intuition. And the beauty of the I Ching is that it does not tell you how to live. It mirrors your inner truth back to you. It takes the knowledge that's already available in your heart chakra, beams it into a translated book so that there's words that your head can understand, and mirrors to your head what your heart already knows. Right? If it were outside advice, I wouldn't want to use it. All right? I hate following rules. I hate following somebody else's advice. I was the class clown part of the time, and I've always been a bit of an iconoclast, and following doesn't really work for me. Although the odd thing is the I Ching gets lots of followers who don't follow much of anything else except their own inner truth, because that's what it's really a mirror for. I think of it as amplifying the still small voice so that even we can hear it. Well, at the end of the 2 hours, I had this hunch, this intuition, which the I Ching encourages and develops as an active process. It's a tool for developing your own intuition. And I said, boy, I just feel like we ought to ask one more time before you go about getting the house. And so we asked one last time, and it said, in essence, of course, and you better get moving, you better go, you've got a narrow window, what are you sitting around here for? And we said, oh, all right. So it just really wanted that clarity of how to think about it and what to listen to, head or heart, when you're, all right. And he went out, and he has the exact details of the story, but it was astonishing by all people. I think he found the house 2 days later and made a bid on it 3 days later and had the contract a week later and moved in 3 weeks later. And it's a wonderful little house that he lives in to this day, has been feng shuied to the gills, and is a lovely place. And in fact, he just got married in the backyard of that house and had the wedding there because it's so wonderful and everybody loves it. There's no point in renting out a more religious, a more spiritual building than that one, because it'd be hard to find one. So that's a very practical, and that's the home ownership. And I mentioned I have used it for buying vehicles and for making residential choices and so on. The office that I currently have, I went to look at years ago and looking at offices, and it was a pleasant place, but it didn't have a good view of the Flatirons. And everyone knows you can't do meaningful spiritual work without a good view of the Flatirons. And so I was going to dismiss it, and really basically just to get permission to move on, I said, all right, I'll ask the I Ching, what do we think about this place? And it gave me an ancient image from the hunt from thousands of years ago. And it says, game is in the field, and it furthers one to catch it. Game is in the field. That's a hunting metaphor. I don't hunt. Oh, but wait a minute, I've been telling all my friends, I'm office hunting. I'm hunting for a new office. Oh, all right, so if I'm hunting for an office, what's the game? Oh, it's the office I've been looking for. And if the game is in the field, how long does game stay in the field? Not long at all. It's a very precarious image that says you shoot and grab it now or you lose. And based on that, I said, all right, called the landlord and made the arrangements and got the office. About a half hour after we signed the paper, while I was still there talking with him, he told me what the rent was, and he said, and then it'll, after 6 months, it'll go from a lease to a month to month, and the rent will never go up after that. And it was so good, I couldn't believe he said it, and I didn't want to ask him to repeat it for fear that he would realize it and say, no, that's a stupid thing to say, excuse me. So I didn't say anything. I said, all right. And while we're sitting there having that discussion, the phone rang, and somebody else from the building claimed it was, oh, I want to get that office that's available. So indeed, the game was not in the field. Hi, come on in. So indeed, the game was not in the field for very long at all. And it was essential to grab it right away. It turns I've now been there for about 7.5 years. We're just about to do some repainting and rearranging. It's been a wonderful place. It's been the best landlord I've had in the 20 years I've been in Boulder. And it's been the ideal building in all kinds of ways I could never have imagined, including when my truck broke and I had only first gear for 5 weeks. There's a loop in the front of the building, and there's a loop around the back of the building so that you never have to use reverse gear, etc. So in all kinds of ways, one could not anticipate when renting. It turns out that it was really an ideal place to be. So that, again, I have to say, well, my ego had a set of preferences, and they were nuts. And I'm really glad I didn't go with my own judgment. I'm glad, at least not with my superficial judgment. The I Ching is really mirroring some deeper knowing within the individual, so apparently that's a part of me too, but it's a lot smarter than the decision maker I was about to rely upon. So these are practical, and I'll tell you one other story about that. The reason I got to look for offices at all, I had been living in an RV on the top of Sugarloaf Mountain for a number of years, and people who wanted to do dream work would come up to the top of Sugarloaf, and we would do 2 and 3 and 4 hour sessions every so often, and that was kind of it. And that was my basic contact with reality. All of my neighbors at that time were four-legged, and I really was very happy up there, and it was kind of time to return to the city life, and I frankly didn't want to. And I assure you the I Ching won't do this with you in the beginning, but the I Ching is a mirror for your higher self, so it's not a fixed book of rules. It's not a set approach to what everyone must do. It's completely personalized, and it's between you and your higher self. So a friend of mine said, gee, there's a place over by the Justice Center I noticed on the way out of town, looked pleasant, had an opening, I see a sign in front. I looked and it was 11 lawyers and a vacancy. Not that there's anything wrong with lawyers, but actually the awe has been removed from the word and it's now just pronounced liars, I guess. That's what I said. But it's like there was no place to park my vehicle and there was no place to have my sculptures around, and it was part of the cops and robbers games of the Justice Center, and I thought, oh no, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is clearly out. And again, really only because Arletta knows that I rely on the I Ching, and she relies on the I Ching, and her husband Tristan relies on the I Ching. In fact, he ran his entire $1 million business based on it. I said, all right, I have to do an I Ching to get permission so I can tell Arletta why I'm not going to take the office that she had told me about. So again, I threw the I Ching, and they said, wonderful opportunity. Oh, this is it. Yes, be sure and take it. And I said, no. This was a Friday evening. I said, no, I'm sorry. You've misunderstood. Okay. Now, it's a terrible office. It's chock full of lawyers. It's by the Justice Center. I really don't want this one. Are you sure? What do you think about this one? The one with the lawyers, please. And it said, fabulous place. Be sure to go right ahead. Grab it now. No. Let me explain. Right? So I did a third I Ching that night, and it said the same thing again. This would be great for you. I woke up Saturday morning in a bit of a snit, and off and on throughout the day, I asked, maybe 8 more times. And every single time, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. You're going to love it there. And here I am trying to figure out, how could this possibly, the lawyers have money and they'll buy my sculptures. I mean, what could possibly, maybe I will get into the cops and robbers game. Maybe I have a life of crime that I've been overlooking. I don't know what it is. And so by Sunday, I was getting a little tired and a little irritable with this, and so I only asked another 7 times on Sunday. And I figured it came to about 20 times that I'd asked the same question by late Sunday night. And every single time in different language said, oh, this is it, go get it, take that office. I know it's not right. I know at some level they know it's not right, and they have never lied, they've never tricked me, they don't, and yet it's not a book of rules. You're talking to your higher self. Monday morning, I woke up angry, and I grabbed a pen, and I wrote the longest question I've ever written, and it had something like, all right, damn it, I began, showing complete respect for the higher powers I'm dealing with. Sorry, folks. Here's what I want. I want an office that has this in it and that in it. I want something that's down to earth and normalist. I don't want a building full of therapists, and I don't want any lawyers in the building, and I want this, and I do want that, and I don't want this. And I wrote this whole half-page question to be really clear about what I'm looking for. And I threw the coins one last time, and it said, in essence, oh, gee, that sounds great. Why didn't you say that earlier? Yeah, go ahead and get that. And I was stunned, and I realized, oh, I know what this 3-day wrestling match has been about. I didn't want an office. I'd looked at 5 or 6 places and dismissed them all out of hand. I didn't want an office. I didn't want to come back into a practice. I didn't want to leave the mountains. And this was a showdown between me and my higher self. And they just pushed. And they won't do that with you when you're new. When you're new, if you ask a question and write it down and talk about it for 3 or 4 minutes and then cast the I Ching, they will generally use exactly the same words that you're using for it. They'll use the same image that you've been relying upon, etc. They'll make it so crystal clear you can't miss it when you're new. And then they'll always be a half step ahead of you for the rest of your next several lives. Okay? That's how that works. It's always here to grow you. It's always here to challenge you. And I'd been doing the I Ching for at least 10 or 12, many more years than that by that point. That's not that long. So a good 14 or 15 years probably at that point. And they said, look, this is a tough cookie. There's only one way to fix him, and that's to make him mad enough to get him to specify what it is he wants. So the I Ching will give you whatever it is you need, but it will always guide you and move you toward truth. All right? So those are a couple of I Ching stories about the actual dialectic with the higher self.